everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrian Hale, and I'll be your MC again for this year's community-focused fund annual fundraiser, where we like to highlight an issue in our community, build a public discussion around it, and help us all leave better prepared as citizens to make a difference. Amen? So, as many of you have seen me over the past couple of years, you know once I start, I can't become too lazy to stop. So if you need me to, just give me that look, and I will gladly keep our program going, all right? We have a great, excellent keynote today. It will be given by Assemblymember Meeks, who will be joining us in just a little bit. But before that, I want us all to give a very rowdy welcome to the students of school number 33, who will lead us in the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Superb job. Superb job. You know, it's funny because every time I hear Lift Every Voice and Sing and we get to the end, and we say true to our God and to our native land, it is a reminder that this land that we all call home belongs to all of us. Amen. And it's a profound belief at a time, because as those words were being written, we know for many people in our country, this land didn't always feel like home. But I think what we've learned through our nation's history is that America has to be a place that we all believe in order for it to be seen. And that's the work that we've all come together to do today. And it's important things like bail reform, which will be the topic that we really discuss, where we realize as we try to rectify some of the institutional and structural configurations of the past, they might not be perfect, but they have to be done. The work is necessary if we're all going to be engaged in that work of producing and creating a more perfect union. But before I start giving you all my keynote, I am going to yield the microphone to our mayor, who has been doing a phenomenal job of that work of building a more perfect union and defending what this country has been about, what the brightest spots in our community's history has been about, in a time where who we are has been under siege and attack. Amen? And I had the privilege in Albany a couple weeks ago to see our mayor up there with other mayors from across the state talk about the work that they're doing in their respective communities. And I love how before he started to talk, he said, well, I'm not going to talk about what we're going to do. I'm going to talk about what Rochester's done. And the Attorney General just got on fire as he began to enumerate all the things that we're doing here in Rochester to really combat not just some of the things coming down from the federal government, but a way of thinking. That is the greatest threat right now that we all have to be aware of. There is a mindset, a mentality, a mind of yesterday trying to creep into the promise of today, like they just sung about in that song, right? And if we're all the children of hope, it's important that we take on the new minds in order to make this place the best of what it can be. So without further ado, please welcome our remarkable, courageous, and fighting mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. It is it's an honor to be here with my good brother here, our regent, New York State regent, who does the important work of making sure our folks get education. I'm going to be brief in my remarks, but I just think that this is such a critical time, an important time in our country and in our city's history. If you turned on the news this morning, you see what's going on in our world. If you watched the news yesterday, you will see what is going on in our world. Yesterday, myself and Senator Schumer broke news about, our federal government and the actions that they are trying to take right over across the street from our federal building, attempting to build holding cells for immigrants over the objection of the court system that operates out of that building, over the objections of the mayor and other folks. So this is a very difficult time, but I want to say events like this are so very, very important because they bring us together in one place to talk about not just what the challenges are, but what we can do to overcome them together. And I always tell folks, there's the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go further, go together. And I will tell you now more than ever in this community, it is important that we go together. And as we look at what's happening at the federal level, and Myra and SPARC, Spiritus Christi is a part of this effort, our Rock Resilience Roundtable, where we have said that we're standing rock solid against hate, against bigotry, against food insecurity, against anti-LGBTQ bias that we are seeing coming out of the highest levels of our federal government. These are concerning times that we live in, but we also can look to history to know that America and Rochester was at its best when we all worked together and didn't just put our heads in the sand and say, it is what it is. We should say, no, this is the way it should be. And by us working together, we can make sure that we do that. So I want to thank again the Black Community Focus Fund and SPARC for this annual fundraiser benefiting the Franklin D. Florence Civil Rights Heritage Park at Baden Park, which is in the process of being built. And that is important for one big reason, because we have a past to remember, a present to live, and a future to build. And in order to build that strong future, you have to learn from the past, and we have to make those investments in our present time so that way future generations will benefit from all of our work. And I will tell you, and I believe that history will not look kindly on many of the actions that you are seeing today. And that's what people should be thinking about. If you care about your legacy, if you care about your history, launching a war without congressional approval, instead of expanding the tent of all of the people that Jesse Jackson called the Rainbow Coalition, marginalizing those people and making them feel as though they are others. That is not who we should be. And in Rochester, we need to continue to push back against that type of behavior. And before I get out of the way and you talk about a very, very important topic, and that is bail reform, which people like to use as a political football. You'll have an expert panel that you will hear from. I will tell you that if you want to look at actual data, not filtered by the news media or anybody else, go to the Rochester Police Department open data portal. Also, I believe Measures for Justice also looks at numbers and data. And I want you to look at it unfiltered. And I want you to look at shootings over the last 10 years. I want you to look at robberies over the last 10 years. I want you to look at assaults. I want you to look at rapes. And then I want you to see where those numbers have gone over the last 10 years. Look at particularly at 2025 and look to see where those numbers are. Because there's fear that people sometimes like to use for their purposes. And then there are facts. And what I beg this community to do is to look at the facts. And the facts will tell you that 2025 was one of our best years as it relates to public safety, and it's one of the best years over the last 10 years. And that's a fact. We're not where we want to be, but we are not where we were. And we must make sure that we use our critical thinking skills, which those young people hopefully they are learning to use. And we cannot let fear drive us. We must be driven by facts, equity, but more importantly, by common sense. So I thank Pastor Myra and SPARC for having this event. You got a great panel today. I give a shout out to our district attorney, Brian Green, newly appointed district attorney, as well as my good friend, Damon L. Meeks. Did he get here yet? Yes, he's here. You're going to hear from them, as well as our Assembly member, Sarah Clark, and the rest of the panel members that are here. I work closely with all of these folks on behalf of public safety, so you are in for a treat. And I'm thankful for all of their work. But more importantly, I'm thankful for all of your work and for showing up. So thank you, Pastor Myra. Thank you, Regent Hell. Thank you for having me, and have a great, great rest of your program.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Now I would like to bring up Gene Utter of the SPARC White Caucus to give some remarks.
Can you see me okay? Okay, I feel like I need to be on my tiptoes. Oh, I am so glad you all came out today. Bail reform, I've got so many questions, I've heard so many things. I really want to find out what's really going on. So thank you, panel, for being here. I'm here to talk a little bit about SPARC and the White Caucus. So SPARC is a coalition of people that come together to fight against racism. And we're a mixture of people. The White Caucus is just the white members of the group. And what we do is we learn about racism and our complicity in it. We're in it all the time, we just don't know it. And by learning these things, we can then reach out to other white people and say, hey, did you know? Did you know? And not in a, oh, you're bad kind of way, but hey, I didn't know this either until I actually decided to look at it. And it's through this that I have grown personally, and I've made some really good friends, so I can't argue about that. Our main focus in the White Caucus and SPARC is to support Black people and to support anti-racism. And we are working hard to try to raise funds for the Civil Rights Heritage Park. And I'm going to now put in a plug for our next fundraiser, so everybody needs to put this on their calendar. So Juneteenth is a big month for us. We're going to be on our 10th annual Juneteenth 5K at Genesee Valley Park. We always bring in some vendors, we bring in community organizations so they can share their information with people. We have a lovely ceremony at the very end in commemoration of Juneteenth and the Black lives that have gone before us. It's a really beautiful ceremony that we do. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to have 2 different concerts. The first concert's going to be June 7th at Highland Bowl, and we're working on bringing in some local jazz artists, so keep your ears open for that. And then the night of Juneteenth, we hope to bring in Ron Carter, and if you're not aware of who he is, he's 89 years old. Can you believe this? And he is a jazz musician. He is a graduate of the Eastman School of Music. He has won, I think, 4 Grammys for his writing. He's one of the most published jazz musicians. And we're bringing him in. We're hoping to bring in rock music kids so he can do a workshop with them. We're hoping to have a VIP meet and greet with him. So please keep your ears and your eyes open for these new events. And again, they're going to be supporting the Civil Rights Heritage Park, and it's a wonderful way to celebrate Black Music Month and Juneteenth. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Before I call up our next speaker, I just want to say something, because I think the work that the White Caucus is doing in SPARC is commendable, and I think it really needs to be uplifted. Can they get another round of applause? See, the only way this thing works, democracy, America, is if we take the time to care about issues that don't affect us, but that still affect the integrity of our democracy, our community, and our country, especially when it doesn't affect us. Only when we stand for other groups whose rights are under attack do we say that we believe in these principles so much so that we'll defend other people's access to them. Amen? Amen. And so to have someone come up and speak about the importance of my group, who doesn't look like me, is an example to all of us, the kind of allyship and solidarity work that we have to do to make this vision of America possible. So thank you so much for the work that y'all doing in the White Caucus. I'm now going to call up from the Faith Leaders Roundtable, Pastor James Cooper. And it's okay that he's not here, because now you get to see me more. Without further ado, I want to ask if we have any elected officials, can they please stand right now for acknowledgement? Can we get a round of applause for our leaders? So I just want to thank on behalf of everybody here today, all of our elected leaders, because as the mayor said, this is a very difficult time. And sometimes we're not always privy to the fights, the debates, the conversations that happen where decisions are made, but just know that our elected leaders really are fighting for our best interests. So without that, I'm gonna say, can we have a poem now called Black Night from Amber Waldegraros. Walder Georges. It rolls off the tongue. Just rolls off the tongue. Please give her a round of applause.
Peace, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Amber Walder Georges. I'm the administrative assistant with Black Community Focus Fund under the leadership of Reverend Myra Brown. I'm also a poet. Today I will be presenting an original piece entitled Black Night. Black like a black night, too dark for your eyesight, blurry, trippy, midnight song, to the moonlight. We're the only thing close enough for you to see our stars. Yeah, cut you down like a black night. Trained under the elites that shine up in the sky, God's cry. Right before my eyes, God created you, and God created you for only our eyes to see the true black light, pierce through the illusory sense of security, bounded to the destiny of bloodline and ancestry, incomplete until the full extinction of their kind. Tortured by evil, but still calm. Be kind, Black Knight. We ride at dawn, winning in every tale there is to tell every time. Original keepers of the land, removing the weeds that once grew from deep-rooted lies, exchanged for the truth told from master's hands. See, you have always been free, and you shall always be. I have always been yours, and you mine. We will always be royalty, supernaturally divine. So now, rise up and fight, Black Knight. Thank you.
Beautiful poem. Thank you so much for that, Amber. Reverend Myra, can you please stand? Please give a hand to Reverend Myra, everybody. Before I ask her to come up here, I just want to say that she has been holding this event year after year after year, forcing our community to have some of its most important conversations, and I think we're all better for it. So thank you so much for always taking the tough stands, always saying the difficult thing that needs to be said that folks don't always want to hear. You are a leader in and out of the rooms, in the community, and in the pulpit. Please welcome Reverend Myra, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today, not just to attend a fundraiser, but to stand up for fairness and dignity and justice in our community, which is why we gather today to talk about bail reform. We're here because we believe that justice should not depend on the size of someone's bank account. For too long, cash bail systems across this country have kept people in jail simply because they are poor. Not because they're dangerous or because they've been convicted, but because they couldn't afford to pay for their freedom. The bail reform discussion today is to learn about the work of correcting that imbalance. It's about ensuring that pretrial detention is based on risk and public safety, not wealth. The second reason we're here today is to support the Minister Franklin D. Florence Civil Rights Heritage Site at Baden Park, the creation of it. This park would not just be green space, but it'll be sacred space, a place that tells the story of struggle and progress, in particular, the Black freedom struggle. It will be a place where children can learn about local and national leaders who pushed Rochester closer to its founding ideals. A place that honors our local civil rights movement. There are stories of fighting for abolition of slavery, to voting rights, to employment rights, housing rights, and education rights, to a plethora of need for modern justice reform. The stories that we will tell in the park will remind us that change is possible when ordinary people demand it and work to bend the arc towards those justice demands. Rochester has a powerful civil rights legacy. From the work of Frederick Douglass, who published his newspaper here and joined the fight to desegregate schools, to Minister Franklin D. Florence, who helped to desegregate Kodak for Black workers, not only opening up better economic opportunities, but having the impact of creating a Black middle class in Rochester. And yet in Rochester, we are fortunate to have had generations of grassroots organizers who fought for housing discrimination, who fought against housing discrimination and educational inequity. This city has always been a place where courage meets action. An outdoor civil rights park will anchor that history in a very permanent, visible way, inviting reflection and dialogue and community connection. The discussion today on bail reform addresses the present. The Civil Rights Park will preserve the past, and it will tell inspiring stories of struggle that will shape our future. To learn more, you can go to our website of the Black Community Focus Fund, and you can learn more at the City of Rochester's website. You can also make an additional donation to this project at rochesterbcff.org, or you can go to the City of Rochester's website, and there's a new survey that is up to give us feedback about what you'd like to see in the Civil Rights Park at Baden Park. So today, your support helps build a justice system that treats people fairly, a justice project, public space that teaches our children why fairness matters. It helps create a Rochester that remembers where it has been and is bold enough to imagine where it can go. Together, we are about building a city where justice is not for sale, where history is not forgotten, and where progress does not have to be postponed. So I want to thank you all for your generosity, your belief in this work, and your presence and your commitment to a more just Rochester. Today, we have an amazing speaker, keynote, and an incredible advocate for the people of our great state of New York, Assemblyman Meeks. Assemblyman Meeks serves as the Democratic Assemblyman for New York State's 137th Assembly District, which includes part of Rochester and the town of Gates. He was first elected in 2020 and has since been re-elected to continue his work in Albany on our behalf. A native of Rochester, Assemblyman Meeks earned his associate's degree from Monroe Community College and a bachelor's degree from SUNY Brockport, along with additional labor-related training from Cornell University. Before entering elected office, he was a labor union organizer with 1199, representing healthcare workers and mobilizing around workers' rights and fair wages and workplace dignity. I met him when he was boots on the ground, seeking justice and fairness for the people that he was representing. And I had the privilege to partner with him way back then in many justice issues, inspired by his strong, clear, brilliant thinking and leadership. In the Assembly, Assemblyman Meeks has championed legislation on criminal justice reform, victims' rights, environmental justice, equitable access to opportunity. He's worked to secure funding for education and housing and public safety programs and community revitalization projects that benefit this district. He is the one who lives among his people with his wife Katrina and their children in the 19th Ward, remaining deeply engaged in local community organizations, mentoring youth, and supporting civic initiatives that strengthen neighborhoods and empower residents. We are so lucky to have him. So help me welcome my friend and our keynote speaker of the hour, Assemblyman Demond Meeks.
Good afternoon. So I prepared some information here, but I really don't want to almost read it. But as it relates to the work that we've done in the state regarding bail reform, I thank you to my colleague Sarah Clark, Assembly Member Sarah Clark. It's at times it's truly been an uphill battle because it's things that you work on because you know and you believe in your heart of heart it's the right thing to do. And then you have systems that attempt to push you backwards after you've made several steps forward. And one of the things that, for me, it was really personal. So I worked as a labor organizer with 1199 SEIU. And, life happens. And I had members who I represented. And more often than not, the situation, which happened maybe a few times, was always young mothers who were single mothers raising their children. And even though they were working in the healthcare field, life happens, and for one reason or another, an individual is caught shoplifting. And with that, historically, the way bail reform operated, it was a pay-to-play type of thing. If you had long money and had major resources, even if you had $1 million bail, you could bail yourself out. But if you was a person coming from humble beginnings and already struggling financially, and your bail was, say, $250, $500, well, if you had $200 or $500 to spare, I don't think you would have been trying to steal diapers or baby formula to begin with. So these things come sort of full circle. I'm one who have fought and advocated to increase the minimum wage in New York State, and some of you I see faces have also worked on that fight. But beyond the minimum wage, we got the minimum wage up to $15 an hour. And while we were fighting for while we were fighting to get that minimum wage up to $15 an hour, studies had already shown that before the onset of the pandemic, a living wage for a single parent raising 2 children was $18.50 an hour. So post-pandemic, we know it's beyond that. So I think back to a great leader in local labor, and Bruce Popper. He would always say, pay the people. He used another word after that, but we in the church. And we go. But yeah, actually, looking at the fact that so many people in our community work 40 plus hours a week and still are considered impoverished. And then when we look at some of these major entities, I know I have family members and friends that work for a mammoth of a company by the name of Walmart. Interestingly enough, every family member that I can think of that worked there receive their health care benefits by way of the government. So you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar institution, but the people who work for this institution are still relying on the government in order to take care of the healthcare costs. So I'll go back to some of the early history with the bail reform. It was implemented in 2019, and it ended the use of money bail in jail for most cases involving misdemeanors and lower level felonies. The law, which was implemented in January of 2020, sought to make release rather than detention the default in these cases. However, this goal has been undermined in the subsequent legislative sessions. One session after the next, it was something else that bail was the cause of, or bail reform was the cause of. After it was politicized, concerns about rising crime during the COVID pandemic, it drove lawmakers to pass 3 rounds of revisions to the law. It now includes several exceptions, allowing judges to set bail in some cases involving lower level offenses. Importantly, there is no evidence showing a connection between bail reform and the rising rates of crime. Understanding these provisions when confronting pundits and politicians who jump to the convenient scapegoat, criminal justice reform is crucial when defending the law and fighting against calls to roll back the law further. I remember having a conversation with a local elected here in this community, and he said, well, Assemblymember, you guys need to do better with bail reform. I said, well, what do we need to do exactly? Well, you need to get rid of it. Well, why should we get rid of it? Well, because people are upset. I said, okay, people are upset. So did you look at the numbers as it relates to bail reform? I don't care about the numbers. This is this conversation. I don't care about the numbers. People are upset, and you guys need to do something. And to borrow a quote from the great rapper Jay-Z, he said, men lie, women lie, but the numbers don't. And with that, we and so when I told him about the numbers, he said, well, we don't care about the numbers. And this individual was also an African-American male. So I said to him, I said, that mindset is the same mindset that got us policies in this state, in the state of New York, like stop and frisk, which in turn led to the death of individuals in this community. So we have to be mindful of policies that we implement, but also take heed as to how they're operating and how they're working to the benefit of the community. So I prepared some statistics here as it relates to court appearances and the return rates. We have a return rate of upwards of 91%. So individuals who are released, 91% return to the courts as they were called to. Return on one's own recognizance releases with no bench warrant, also 91%. Supervised release with no bench warrant, 84%. Failure to appear rate, and this particular rate is in New York City, 9%. Not arrested for a violent felony, 97% of those individuals return as it relates to what bail reform called for. And not rearrested overall, 95.7%. So when this was implemented, it was looking at the fact that you have people who are arrested on nonviolent offenses who were spending, in some instances, years in jail before trial. One of the major things that led to a lot of the advocacy in New York City was the Khalif Browder case, where he actually died in custody. So with this, and later to be determined that he was innocent. So when we look at these instances, you know, I'm one that believe and know factually that in New York State, there's not one law in the books that carry the death penalty, right? So there's no reason and no justification for individuals to die in this manner. So before 2019, about 26% of cases resulted in bail or remand statewide. After reform in 2020, that number declined to approximately 17%. Statewide, pretrial release rates increased from roughly 74% in 2019 to 83% in 2020. Felony release rates increased from approximately 41% to 60%. Approximately 24,400 fewer people were ordered to pay bail during the first 2 years of reform than 1,000 fewer people per month. This shows you that over time, since this has been implemented, we've seen better outcomes. It also helps push back against perpetual poverty. When you have an individual who has a job in an environment such as the healthcare field, which I represented, a no call, no show will often equate to termination. So if a person is temporarily incarcerated, that can relate to them losing their job, losing their way of providing for their families. And the key thing is looking, like Rochester, we've fought over the years. We established drug court, mental health courts, and other courts that look at people and look at some of the challenges that they actually have. So the question would be, why is this person engaged in this type of activity? Well, in the case of a mom still in diapers or formula, she's looking to provide for her children. What can we possibly do to help her? Can we connect her to a WIC program? Can we connect her to some SNAP benefits? But looking at the person holistically, looking at the challenges that we face as a community collectively, and helping individuals be the better versions of themselves. So when you look at 95.7% of these individuals not returning to the system, period, as far as not getting involved in another crime, I think that's absolutely huge. And it speaks volumes to some of the things that we're implementing. As a state official, looking at some of our challenges, and I talk with the mayor on a regular basis, we talked about some of the strides that we've made as a community in regards to law enforcement. There were a number of large drug busts that took place in the year 2025. They recovered drugs, they recovered guns. And we had the conversation about looking at things from the aspect of supply and demand, right? As it relates to drugs in our community, there's a major demand for it. And there's also major suppliers. And I personally dream of the day, and we talked about looking at resources we could tap into to bring about a system where, okay, once the drug house has been busted, if you sat around that area for a few days, you would see that people are going back, knocking at that door, looking to buy or purchase their drugs. These are individuals who are in the throes of addiction. I said, what if we could implement a system working with organizations that are on the front lines of this crisis to put them in a trailer, to put them right outside of that house. So when that individual goes up and knock at that door, they can say, hey, sir, hey, ma'am, I'm such and such from this organization. Just want to let you know that, the police came and they busted the house. However, I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you. I see that you're in the throes of addiction. What are you challenged with? What is your drug of choice? If you can share a little information with me, I have some resources right here. I have access to Suboxone. I have access to some other things that may help you in this moment, because realistically, you have an itch that you need to scratch in this moment, and me talking to you doesn't solve your problem. So let's get your information. I'll get you these things, but if you're interested, we can actually take you over here to this facility, and if you want to get started working on your sobriety today, we can do that. But in the case that's not the case, we want to build a relationship with you, and let's work on your recovery together. And I think we have to start thinking about systems from a more humanistic perspective opposed to a penal perspective. How can we constantly punish people who have been punished their whole lives? Individuals who are struggling with adverse childhood experiences. And when we talk about criminal justice, that's something that we often miss, that conversation on adverse childhood experiences. What exactly led you to do this? Where did you learn it from? And I think back to my childhood days in the 80s, there were all types of commercials that educated us on drugs and the harm that it could cause your body. And you had a young kid who was engaging in drugs, and his dad said, "Hey, what are you doing? Where did you learn this?" And he said, "I learned it from watching you," right? And that's our reality. Sometimes the things that people learn or endure is from learned experiences, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So I encourage you to make sure that, you take time to read up on these things, read more on bail reform. You could go to our state website. You can do a brief Google search on this as well. But one thing I will say is that we have to be mindful of the media that we go to on a daily basis to get our information. We have to be mindful of that, because when you look at the struggles that so many in our community are faced with, and then you look at those of us who are out here advocating for social justice, those of us who are out here advocating to see that there's so many social flaws, and the way that we begin to correct these social flaws is look at ways that we implement policies to tax the ultra rich. So you have folks advocating for these type of things on the ground, and you don't get a lot of airplay in the media. You wonder why? Do you think it's the everyday Joe that controls the media, or it's the ultra rich that controls the media? So there's been a practice historically to pit one group against the next group. And when you operate in that manner, you find just dissension. And some are good at, and some are intentional in stirring dissension amongst everyday people. And we have to be intentional in rising above such practices. We have to look after one another. We have to encourage one another. And we have to be intentional in speaking life into one another. So these reforms that we've advocated for, a number of us have taken positions that, there's been some amendments, there's been some additional changes, and we're not going to continue to stand for our leaders to roll these policies back. Another thing I'll mention briefly is raise the age. We organized as legislators, and we had conversations with our governor before we even returned to session that there's no negotiating on raise the age. Because when we fought to raise the age, when we fought to implement that policy, we also fought for millions of dollars that were supposed to go into all of our communities across the state. And only maybe a third of that money has gone out the door. So when we look at communities like Rochester that had a major uptick in car theft, and a number of those cars were being stolen by a good number of our youth in the community, we had our leaders come together and say, "Hey, well, what can we implement?" And we implemented a program that similar to a PINS program, person in need of supervision, but working with the city and the county, implemented a program that the governor is actually considering implementing across the state of New York. And what this program does is, once they have an individual who has been taken off the streets or arrested for car theft, or in this case it was a car theft, they have a conversation with the judge, sometime in family court because they're underage. They have a conversation with the family members, the Office of Probation. And collectively, they come together, and also the DA's office. They come together collectively, and they say, okay, well, what can we do to help this individual? And they implemented a practice where, in some instances, they may receive an ankle monitor. They set some rules in place to say, hey, you need to show up to school on a daily basis. You have an 8 o'clock curfew, and we're setting these rules in place. And these are things that parents and the system collectively agreed upon, and these children have not been convicted or found guilty of anything. But what we find is it's in the implementation of this program, the first, I want to say 120 kids that were involved in this program, there was a recidivism of 5. So when we look at things from a humanistic perspective and look at how we can help people and look at some of the challenges that we are plagued with as a community, we can affect positive change. And that positive change is beneficial to us all as a community. So again, thank you all for your time, and please be intentional in doing your research. And thank you, Pastor Myra, for hosting another awesome event. Thank you.
Give Assemblyman Meeks one more hand. You know, there was a couple points that he made that I really want to make sure we take away with us. The first one was he said that we want to punish people who've been punished their whole lives. And I just want you all to put yourselves in the shoes of a person like myself or Assemblyman Meeks, who grew up in a community that isn't in its best time. Right? We grew up in a lot of the troubles and challenges we see on the news every day. And for every Damon or Adrian Hale, there are tens and hundreds who don't make it to the places and spaces that we've been privileged to be in. And that's not a result on any lack of effort or energy from them, but we have to face the reality that many of our community's young people have been failed from birth, from the very family system they were born into because of the lack of support and resources, emotional stability, from the communities that we live in, by the way that we practice our institutional interventions, how our social working system, how our school systems, which I'm leadership in this state, and many systems that have failed our young people, which is why when he said we have to raise the age, that's just us acknowledging that if a child is before us for criminal activity at 16 years old, can we really blame that child? Or are there systems and institutions responsible for their condition and the subsequent actions and behavior that resulted from that? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. The other one was when he started to talk about the ultra rich, right, and their control of the media, how they control and dominate the narrative, but folks are constantly at war with each other. We have a history of fighting down. We have a history of fighting people who in reality pose no threats to us. But that was set up through racial discrimination in this country because discrimination or fighting down is a way for groups to take out their anger on others. And I want to revisit something I said earlier about solidarity and allyship from the SPARC White Caucus. When you advocate for justice or equality that pertains to you, but you don't stand in solidarity, you don't stand in allyship, it collapses into self-interest. You understand that? You're not really advocating for justice and equality. You're advocating for something in your own best interest. And we've been seeing a lot of that in our country. And we have to learn again how to be allies, right? That it's not our job to take out our anger and frustration with systems and institutions on others, but to go to the heart of the matter. Not just even where the actions are coming from, but who is trying to program us in a way where we think that that's the solution. So thank you so much, Assemblymember, for your remarks and your words. Extremely important. We thank you and Assemblymember Clark for the work y'all are doing in Albany. These are very important issues, and we're glad that we have both of you there advocating for us. Give them both a round of applause. So before we go into our panel where we're going to be able to bring this discussion down to all of you, we're going to take a 10-minute break so you can go to the bathroom, get some refreshments, and then we're all going to meet back here. You got what time is it? So we're all going to meet back here at 1:26. You said it's 1:16, right? Oh, okay, 1:16. I was given 10 minutes for what I thought it was 1:16. So at 1:16, we're all going to be back here. So we got 10 minutes, everybody. Thank you. We have a very distinguished panel for you all to take this conversation now. From the mountaintop of our keynote, now down to the grassroots conversation with some of our leaders who are a part of this very important line of work. So I'm just gonna say your name and you can just raise your hand to let everybody know who you are. And if you guys would be so gracious to just give them an applause. So first off, I wanna say Brian Green, our district attorney. Jill Perperno, the Chief Strategy Officer for Empire Justice. Donald Thompson, a Civil Rights Attorney and partner at Easton Thompson. Juliana Sianka, Monroe County Public Defender. I know, I thought your name would be better as Juliana. Did you like it? You know, I did too. Sarah Clark, New York State Assemblywoman. And Damon Meeks, New York State Assemblyman. So let's kick the conversation off here. The Assemblyman mentioned in his remarks earlier that bail reforms took place in 2019. There have been subsequent iterations to make reforms where judges have more discretion, and they've expanded some of the kinds of crime where now cash bail is applicable. But before we start, there's an important thing I want us all to do just to level set here. With our new district attorney, Brian Green, right, you being a Democrat coming on after years of Republican leadership, can you tell us how you being a Democrat changes the way you view the way you execute the powers vested in your role, and how you see this issue of bail reform in contrast to potentially your predecessor?
Sure, thank you, Adrian, I appreciate that. And thanks for everybody being here today. It's an important discussion and I'm happy to be a part of it. I think what it boils down to for me is that the job is actually about the work and the people, not about the image, right? Obviously, you know, we need to have results in the district attorney's office because there are people out there that do terrible things, right? But the approach that you take is dependent on the case that you have to prosecute, right? I was actually just talking about this the other night at my campaign kickoff, and I talk about it when I teach regularly at Monroe Community College in St. John Fisher. People ask me, students in particular, about my job as a prosecutor over the years, and I always turn it back on my students and I ask them, you know, what do you think the role of a prosecutor is? And inevitably they shout out answers like send people to prison, get a conviction, and I pull it back and I tell them, no, that's not actually the job. The job is about doing the right thing on every case every day, right? It's to find justice. Justice isn't always a conviction, and it's not always the longest prison sentence, right? And I urge my assistant district attorneys and the staff in our office to take that same approach. We really have to dig into each case and find out, you know, what's the problem and what do we need out of this case? You know, and I can tell you that I've personally walked into court and seen a homicide case dismissed, right? Or asked for it to be dismissed. I can't go forward on the case, right? But I've also, you know, fought to put someone in prison for life without parole, right? It's a huge spectrum, and it really just depends on what we need in that particular instance. For bail reform, you know, I expect over the course of the next 8 months while I'm campaigning for a full term that I'll get a lot of criticism for this, and that's okay because, you know, I'm being tongue-in-cheek, but, you know, I don't care about the numbers either because it was the right thing to do. All right. You know, it was overdue. I've seen, in my own experience, prosecutors who abused bail, right? I know people who ask for ridiculous bail because they want to keep someone in custody, because it's easier to get a plea if someone's in custody than if they're out of custody. And that's not what the system's about, right? As soon as I came back to the office, well, actually, let me back up a second. So I spent almost 2 years as a judge in the town of Irondequoit before I came back to the district attorney's office. And sitting up there while assistant district attorneys, and they're young assistant district attorneys, they're still learning. They don't know what they don't know yet, right? And they're asking for, $10,000 cash bail for someone who's got a first-time petty larceny, right? And they lose credibility, right? And so when I came back to the DA's office, I tried to make that a point, that you need to be reasonable in what you ask for, and you need to have a basis for what you ask for, right? They don't always have to be in custody, right? And I recognize the harm that being in custody can do to a person or to a family or to a community. And sometimes, yes, that's what we're asking for, but there are a lot of cases where we don't see that as necessary. So, as a level set, as you say, Adrian, that's where I'm coming from on this issue.
Thank you. And I want to give Public Defender Sianka the right to kind of say the same thing. You're charged with defending those who don't have the ability to provide for their own defense. How do you approach your role and the responsibilities of that role?
With regard to bail reform or just in general?
In general.
In general.
And then you can add bail reform in at the end, like you did.
My role is all about supporting my staff. So I've been working in the public defender's office for over 30 years, and I started out as just an ordinary line attorney out in town courts. And as a consequence of being out in courts for as long as I was and having exposure to as many different judges and DAs and different court personnel as I have, I learned a lot. And as a result, I believe I'm able to support my employees. That's really my number one objective, in ways that I believe they should be supported, whether that be supporting them when a judge is being unfair to them or unjustly critical, whether or not they're being mistreated, in court by anybody, whether or not they need help handling their cases or understanding how to deal with a difficult client. So my role has really been almost, I would say, 90% of it is trying to be as much of an assistant and as much of a colleague as I can to my attorneys who are actually out there doing the work. I'm sitting in an office now, and I miss court a lot, but I'm sitting behind a desk, and my job is to make sure that those who are actually doing the hard work, including the support staff, feel supported and feel like they have all the resources that they need in order to do their job effectively.
And to build on what the district attorney mentioned about how, you have somebody who might be a first offender, right? And they get some $10,000 bail set. Can you talk just how, yourself and folks in your office respond to those kinds of judgments? So
what I can tell you is that, is everybody familiar with the concept of being off-label use? So if you're taking, yeah, okay. So if you're taking medication for one thing and the doctor says, we use this off-label for this because we found out it's super effective. What I've learned over 30 years is judges use bail for an off-label use, for an unlawful use. Judges, starting back in my days out in Gatestown Court, would reflexively set absurd bail on cases. Not so much even to keep people in jail, which I believe that was part of it, but was to telegraph their opinions about the accused or about the offense of which they had been charged. So it's kind of almost like a virtue signaling on the part of judges. Here's my opportunity to show, all too often, my white constituents how I feel about a black defendant in my town. I'm going to set $10,000 bail and they're going to sit in jail. And then my constituents will know how I feel about that. It was a way for judges to show how they felt. If you were an individual charged with an assault 2 in the jail, and you came before a judge, and that judge is now in a position of, how much bail am I going to set on this case when I got deputies standing right in front of me? Well, I better set really high bail so everybody knows how I feel about assaults in the jail, and I show my support for law enforcement. It's not what bail is for.
That's
it
right.
Never was meant for those things, but it got that kind of perception of that off-label use. So people in the community started to think, That's what bail is. Bail is for judges to show their disdain. And so when bail reform became a thing and judges were no longer able to show their disdain, people got upset because, like, why isn't this judge mad? Why isn't this judge throwing this person accused of this heinous crime in jail? Why aren't they doing that? This person has been on parole. They should be back in jail. They're a bad person. Because judges used it, they abused it for so long, people started to think that's what bail is for. So I'm going to jump ahead, because I see in the questions here is, with the idea that is the primary purpose of a bail. Bail doesn't have a primary purpose. That implies there's a secondary purpose. Bail only has one purpose, and that's to ensure that a person return to court, period. And stop. You can Google it if you don't believe me, okay? You can Google it. It is the only reason, and if you look at the history of bail, you'll be fascinated to see that it goes back to like the Magna Carta, where kings were using bail to punish their political opponents. Does that sound familiar? Okay? So this question of how much bail should we put on somebody is something that dates back, I don't know when the Magna Carta was it hundreds of years, thousands, I don't know. And it was a long time ago, super long time ago. But it's the idea that you cannot use bail for political purposes, to punish political opponents or to make political points. It is only to ensure that a person return to court. So my office obviously has been very committed to making sure that we say that early and often to those judges and sometimes those assistant district attorneys who seem to have forgotten that point. So.
No. And those were some extremely powerful points. And I'll say, like, even for me, I didn't know that judges use bail as a way to show disdain for certain crimes and support for law enforcement. So you just kind of informed and enlightened my perspective, which I think is key, because a lot of times within our own bubbles, there are certain cultural norms that exist, going back to implicit bias and just some of the equity focus about how do we break down those barriers to understand how some actions and some behaviors are really a result of deeper held beliefs. Which takes me to another question, but I kind of want this to be open to anyone. How do you think the balance between the presumption of innocence and the need to protect the community while someone is awaiting trial is balanced out?
There we go. I think my colleague has pointed out this a lot, I think, but one of the biggest frustrations over the last 6 years, 5 that we've been here, sort of fighting back against a lot of misinformation around bail. I go to meetings now and, we'll have an hour on the books and I spend 30 minutes, having to walk back misinformation before we can even get to how can we constructively move forward and where might there be gaps and where might we need to look at things, because we're just defending and re-explaining the wrong misconceptions out there about bail. And I have to say, in the last 5 years in the Assembly, bail reform was, anything that would go wrong, bail reform would become the issue. And so it was quite amazing. Not only is bail really about return to court, but the presumption of innocence is really, we have to defend that system more than we defend anything. 100%. It is the system of justice, the only system of justice, that a democracy, that a nation where we want people to be equal, it is frustrating at times, and it may be hard at times, and there are tragic things that happen a lot in our communities. But if we don't defend that single piece, that you are innocent before you are proven guilty, we are going to lose the rest of our democracy. And so I would say it is super important. But what is interesting about bail, not only did it become this idea that it was a way to keep people in who may be perceived as dangerous, but then people kept saying they're getting off with no consequences. And we kept being like, bail's not the consequence. Working through the judicial system and ending up with either a plea or a conviction or getting acquitted. That's the system that leads you to your consequence, not bail. Bail has nothing to do with your consequence for your action. And so it has been a tough road on some of that as we fight back against some of this. But again, whether it's due process, ensuring everyone has representation, everyone, and the presumption of innocence, these are fundamental things to both our justice system and our democracy.
Yep. All right, I want to make a request to the audience real quick. I love y'all, but can we hold our applause to the end? just because I want to get them into the conversation, because a lot of powerful points have just been made, and I want to make sure we stay on that. You just brought up the whole concept of what a dangerous person is, which I appreciate because, and I'm going to constantly probably go back to the Assembly member's keynote because he talked earlier about, who has control of our media, how are certain groups being depicted in media, and the perception of dangerousness and how that's informing that decision. As we start to think through bail being used to keep people to come back to court, but also folks want to have this element of public safety and making sure that dangerous people are not on the streets, how do we counter this perception of who dangerous is, who's dangerous or deemed as dangerous?
There we go. You got it.
Okay. Is that working? Yes.
Yep.
So one of the things that I think many or all of us recognize at this point is that I'm going to refer to it as the criminal justice system, but we may not really think of it as the criminal justice system. So yeah, right. Air quotes on the criminal justice system. That the system is imbued with systemic racism throughout its history. And so when we're dealing with procedures and issues that come up in that system, when we hear dangerousness, I think we can also think that throughout its history, this criminal justice system has treated some people, black people, brown people, as dangerous or more dangerous than white people. And so it's a real challenge to overcome those concepts. One of the things that has been an effort among those who oppose bail reform is to add an analysis of dangerousness. But many of those kinds of analyses or instruments, they're called risk assessment instruments, are often racist and biased. And so I don't think that that is something that has a place in this system, especially since, as Julie said, the purpose of bail is to get someone to return to court. And so when we're looking at various aspects of this system, whether it's who's getting arrested for a low-level traffic stop, who gets arrested, period, who's held on bail, what's the sentence, what happens if someone violates probation, what's the sentence after a violation? There are racial disparities in all of those areas. And so one of the things that we need to do, because we may not eliminate that systemic bias and that the implicit bias, the racism of the system, is to remove the discretion of those who are making the decisions in many of these areas. So bail reform was intended to do that. It was intended to address racial disparities, and one of the ways it did that was to remove the discretion of judges to hold people and say, well, I'm gonna hold you, but not you. Yep, you, I think I'm gonna hold you and not you. Mm-hmm. And if we remove that discretion in different parts of this system, I think we will see a reduction in those racial disparities.
Now, my follow-up, it's okay. It's all right. We're gonna be a work in progress. My follow-up question to you and to anyone, right, would be, so what would you say, right, and I think it's important for us to just continue to denote, right, that bail is only used in certain cases anyway. We're not talking about violent crimes, or it's important for us to correct the narrative.
I'm not sure I understand your question. I'm sorry. Bail is used, well, bail can be imposed in violent crimes and certain other crimes.
Yeah, excuse me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the removal of cash bail was for nonviolent offenses and whatnot, but it still applied very much so to violent crimes and other. So my point is, most of the folks who would have actually posed a threat to the community, they're already covered under that, right? We're talking about low-level nonviolent offenses where people want to impose this strict sense of punishment where now you have a $10,000 bail on yourself because you didn't stop at a stop sign.
Right, and so one of the effects that may have occurred as a result of bail reform is while people were mandated to be released under a number of circumstances, these lower level offenses, there have been some studies indicating that there's higher bail for violent felony offenses. And I'm not sure if that's a need for the judges to signal, you know, I'm taking this stuff seriously, even though I can't hold people on these other offenses.
Mm-hmm. So my question would be this to the whole panel here, right? Because they like to create, well, opponents of bail reform like to create these stun-gun terms like catch and release, right? How do we create a language that counters these colloquialisms that are easy to be used and to be spread among those who oppose the reforms that we're trying to advocate for?
Well, the first thing we should do is put a stop to that kind of conversation. If you're a law enforcement officer, it's not your job to make sure that the person that you arrest stays in jail. Stay in your lane. You know, so if you're worried about danger, I mean, there's been a lot of lobbying to include a dangerousness factor into our bail statute. We don't have it. Okay, I practice a lot in federal court. You can consider dangerousness to the community and risk of flight in federal court. And so you know what happens in federal court? They don't set a bail that you can't make just to set a bail, to have some appearance, because they can hold you. They'll just hold you. But also in federal court, you know, unlike state court, they're kind of like the Mounties. Their idea is, well, we always get our man. So, you know, we'll let you out. And if you transgress, we're going to get you. And there's penalties in the future for that. They have a little bit more confidence in that. And like in state court, in federal court, the penalties for committing new offenses while you're out are pretty significant. And you know, surprisingly, people are aware of that. So that's why we have these low recidivism rates that Assemblyman Meeks talked about. That's why people come back to court, because most of the time what's going to happen is people are going to come back to court anyway. They're impressed with the power of the system. I mean, somebody dragged them out of their house potentially, or out of their car, brought them downtown, they got processed, they got fingerprinted, they got photographed. You know, it's a very unsettling procedure. This is what the system can do to you. So, you know, they're inclined most of the time to come back to court when they're supposed to come back to court. I've had clients who have come from other states to come back for appearances on DWI offenses or lower level offenses because they knew they had to be there and they were impressed with the power of the system. We don't have to over-impress people with the power of the system. We don't have to crush these people that have already been crushed to a great extent by the system. I mean, what we should be doing is what Assemblymember Meeks said: pay the people. You know, just pay the people. But we don't have the political will for that. I mean, you have a lot of these problems that are generated by an unequal playing field, and we're not leveling the playing field. You know, and until we have the political power to level the playing field, it doesn't make sense to punish the people who are already disadvantaged, right? Which is what bail has done historically throughout for these lower level offenses where, you know, you go to jail because you can't make the bail while you're waiting for a lower level offense to be tried, and you might lose your apartment, you might lose your job, you know, your landlord might change the locks and put your stuff out at the curb, your neighbors might come over and take all the stuff that you had, and then you're at ground zero again. That's not helping those people at all, and it's not helping us because they're getting out. They're coming back into society, and now they got nothing. They're starting at zero again. So it's kind of counterproductive.
I just want to ask a question to start. I think one thing that I experience a lot when people ask me about bail reform is that people generally don't understand how the process actually works. So would it be helpful if we just explain that so that you understand what bail reform actually was? Okay. All right, so when bail reform was implemented, the first thing to know is that they divided the types of crimes into two different categories. Crimes that do not qualify for cash bail and crimes that do qualify for cash bail. And the ones that do not qualify for cash bail generally are crimes that are misdemeanors and nonviolent offenses, lower level felonies. And generally speaking, the crimes that do qualify for cash bail are higher level felonies and violent felonies, all right? And when someone comes before a judge for arraignment on one of the charges that are not bail qualifying, the judge has a limited set of options available, which is primarily release on their own recognizance, or in some cases, maybe some non-monetary sanctions like pretrial release, or, well, generally it's release of some sort or another, right? And then when the judge is seeing someone who is being arraigned on a charge that is bail qualifying, the judge has additional options available, right? Including cash bail. But the presumption is still release under the law. All right, so even in those cases, the judge is supposed to start at the concept of, can I release this person? And if so, how do I release this person? And if the judge answers no to that question, then they can consider cash bail and how much cash bail is warranted to ensure the person's return to court. And everybody talks about wanting to have a dangerousness system or classification or whatever, so that a judge can decide, well, this person's dangerous and we should keep them in custody. And a lot of people don't know the bail system, right? And so if a judge is going to set cash bail, the judge has to go through a series of factors in the statute to decide whether it's warranted, and some of those factors touch on that idea. So, everybody says, well, the judges don't have any discretion, or the judges should have more discretion. If they get to that point to decide that cash bail is relevant, then they have to say, okay, well, let me think about the previous record and with respect to the person's flight to avoid coming back to court, right? If monetary bail is authorized, I have to consider the circumstances of that person, the financial circumstances, how much bail would be required. But there are also considerations like any prior violations of an order of protection, the principal's history of use or possession of a firearm, whether the charge is alleged to have caused serious harm to an individual or a group of individuals, right? So the system does touch on those ideas, and the judges can say, okay, well, that factor I think is really relevant here, and I'm going to set cash bail on this person for that reason, right? And then the other time the idea, it's not really dangerousness, but the other time that comes in is one of the sort of rollbacks to bail reform. There's an exception that's colloquially referred to as the harm on harm exception. And the idea there is that if someone's been to court on a charge that alleges harm to a particular person or entity, and that could be property damage or theft or a few other things, and they're out on their own recognizance on that first charge, and then they're arrested on another charge that alleges the same thing, the judge can consider that fact and can make that second charge bail qualifying, right? So that's the first time we've really seen an exception in the bail statutes for that idea of dangerousness, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. And then I do think people need to understand the statistics, and I think the statistics that Assemblymember Meeks pointed out are really important. That low level of recidivism as far as returning to court, right? People talk about the revolving door or the catch and release, and as a judge, what I saw was that most people came back to court. It was a small group of people who didn't come back to court, and most of the time that was either someone who has a long history in the system or someone who might be in the throes of addiction and they get out on the street and they commit another theft and then they don't come back to court. And there were people that I saw, that I would set, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 warrants successively in the same case, or they would have 5 cases pending at the same time, right? And so there's this small group of people that fall into that sort of, catch and release system. The other time we see that a lot is with organized retail theft, right? Crime generally is down and violent crime is down, and that's great. We do see an increase in theft, and those are the kinds of cases that we see repeatedly, people not coming back to court because their job is to go steal, mm-hmm. right? They go steal, they sell it, sometimes they get caught, they get out, they go do it again. It's a job for them. And that's when we see people habitually not coming back. And that's when you use that exception, the harm on harm exception, to try to keep someone in so that that repetition stops.
I would only say, opposition to things, it's pretty easy to come up, when you get to sort of work on people's fears or their, which I think a lot of the pushback on bail reform has really been centered around trying to get people fearful so that you can come up with things like catch and release. Those colloquialisms are much easier to do when you don't really care if you're centering it in truth or not. But I do say, one of the things we've been very clear, our DA has pointed out some of the rollbacks which got after repeat offenders. There was an additional adding of some bailable offenses around gun possession and gun crimes. But what I say now, to make it simple, is that all the tools that people keep saying they want, whether it's a dangerousness standard to hold people who they see as very dangerous to our community or whatever, like all the tools that they want already exist. It's in the judge's discretion. We don't sit in those courtrooms, most of us. We don't know what's actually happening. But those tools that people really want are there. Whether they're used or not is really, again, on each unique situation, both on what they're able to be charged with, what the crime is, their record, all these different things. And so if we could just keep it simple and just keep pushing back on the narrative and say the tools already exist, the tools already exist, the tools already exist. We don't have to roll back anything more, and we definitely don't need a dangerousness standard.
And I would just say that the best anti-crime initiative is opportunity. When we look at some of the challenges that we've seen throughout this community, in particular with our youth, we were intentional in expanding the Summer Opportunity Program that gave more of our youth job employment opportunity throughout the summer months. Then we went back to the state, secured more millions of dollars to expand that program throughout the year. So we have youth who used to work only for a summer opportunity job. Now they're working throughout the fall and the winter. So I think, when you look at some of the challenges that we've seen with our youth in our community historically, but the same thing goes for adults. If we provide quality jobs with quality wages, that's the best anti-violence initiative for a community like Rochester. Thank you.
That's right. Oh, please.
Did we want to go to another question?
Oh, I didn't. I think.
Yay. So when we hear phrases like catch and release and some of the other rhetoric that we hear, it really is, I think, a deliberate attempt to remove the humanity from the people that we're dealing with. And it winds up, with us talking about statistics and not thinking about that person who has a life, who has children, who's in school, who's working, who has a home. And so I think that's deliberate, and there's been a lot of deliberate effort to really push back on bail with misinformation. So, for example, in talking about statistics, there's been a study done of 33 cities, and the analysis was, did bail reform increase crime? And they took cities that did not have bail reform and cities that did have bail reform. And when crime went up, it went up throughout, so it had nothing to do with bail reform. And that was done by the Brennan Center for Justice, I believe. There was another analysis of recidivism, and this might have been the one that Assemblymember Meeks was referring to, but it had to do with whether people got arrested more often or less often. In New York City, they were actually rearrested less often when they were released. Across the state, generally, it was, outside of New York City, the same. So it wasn't that it increased the number of arrests, but we hear all of this fear-mongering, some from our own sheriff. If you go to his website, you'll see a lot of claims that are made, but no statistics, no specific information. And I think I want to encourage everyone, when you hear those things, think about the humanity and think about, is there anything backing this up? Where are the statistics? Where's the evidence?
Yeah, like Sarah said, bail reform has been kind of the boogeyman. But if you look at the numbers, you might as well just say, look, crime's going up because there's too many meatballs. We're opposed to all these meatballs, so crime is out of control. I mean, there's no relationship between the two, and the folks who are fear-mongering, as Jill said, count on you not getting your information from reliable sources and from objective sources. So please do that.
And I guess I'll just follow up by making a distinction between criminal justice and public safety, which I think needs to be made. So the criminal justice system, the one that I work in, the one that Brian works in, Jill has, Don has, is controlled by the criminal procedure law and the penal law. You can look it up. And there's rules and laws that we're obligated to follow, that judges are obligated to follow, that defines crimes, defines statutes, defines procedure. That's where the bail statute is in the CPL. So that's criminal justice. Public safety is a completely different animal. Public safety is what the sheriff is rightfully so concerned about. Public safety is what law enforcement is concerned about. Public safety is what all of us are concerned about in living in safe communities. But public safety is governed by different laws and different rules and different objectives. So I think it's just to kind of follow up on all this. It's really, really important for people to understand that bail was never, ever meant to be a public safety measure. It was never meant to address concerns about public safety. And I know that's a hard thing to say, but it's the truth. There are many, many other things that concern themselves with public safety. But bail isn't one of them. Bail is a criminal procedure or more of a criminal justice type concept. So it's kind of important to keep those two things separate.
So earlier, I talked about how if a person is not showing solidarity for another group of people in their plight, whatever kind of advocacy that they're doing, whether it be criminal justice, public safety, it collapses into just self-interest. I hope you all are hearing that there are interests behind this messaging, there's interest behind this fear-mongering, and I kind of want to open it up to the panel to talk about what are some of the hidden interests that the public might not understand that's implicated by reforms such as what we've seen with bail.
You hit the nail on the head with self-interest. When we look at how bail reform has been implemented, we've seen across the state where the numbers in a number of our county jails have declined. So if you're an institution in which your resources, your money is based upon how many people you house in your institution, I mean, it would be more in your interest to have individuals housed there based upon you receive resources on your census. So, I mean, that could be a factor for that particular industry. I'll put that out there.
I also want to say, I mean, on a purely political level, we have had a lot of success in Monroe County electing Democrats over the last few years. And so I think there are forces that would like on a political level to elect more Republicans. And so one of the ways that they have really tried to go after us is that we have made our community less safe. And it is a message, and I will tell you, for our state delegation particularly, the 6 of us in the majority, 2 in the Senate and 4 in the Assembly, we had some really rough, including one of our colleagues having a sheriff run against him, or a former police chief running against him, hammering over and over again, literally saying any crime was our fault. And it is done purposely to try to make people feel like our policies have made the community less safe. And we stayed united. We watched in other parts of the state where some of our Democratic colleagues caved and said they really supported rollbacks, and they, were thinking of a dangerousness standard. And we tried really hard to stay united, to talk about the progress we're making, what our ideals are, how we make communities safe, all the things that we're trying to do, and stay really on message. And we all won. And some of my colleagues across the state who caved, lost. And I think there is something to be said to sticking to the facts. And it is hard to be in politics right now when we don't all work from the same set of facts. But when we stick to the facts and then we talk about what we are trying to do, the fact that we've added 1,500 youth jobs to Rochester every year, the fact that We've finally fully funded foundation aid for our school district to do the work that it needs to do, that we have doubled down on programs that intervene in youth lives, on guns and violence and gangs. These programs work. And if we can stop, quickly dismiss or do what we can to make sure people understand this isn't about bail reform and pivot to what is working, I think we will continue to have the success we have. But some of it is just purely political from other political parties who want to blame Democrats for public safety issues.
I think we need to acknowledge that a lot of the opposition here is still based on racism. Because, I mean, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts lately about how every decision really is based on racism, going back to like integration of swimming pools. Well, the white members would rather fill in the swimming pools than allow integration. It's so powerful, and our country was founded on racism in large part, and we haven't cured it. We haven't accepted responsibility for it. My view is until we give reparations, we never will, because it's important for not only the receiver of the reparations, but the giver. You have to accept responsibility, and we've never accepted that responsibility. And many of these decisions are still based on fear and racism at the base. Right, so we have to look at that, and it was like the woman from SPARC was saying earlier. It's the water, and we swim in it, so we're not always cognizant of it, but we have to recognize it and see that as a motivator, because it is. And if we're not recognizing that, then we're not actually performing the math on the equation correctly.
First of all, I appreciate you for saying that. I kind of want to marry two points that were made, right? Because sometimes I think we talk about racism and it's an abstraction because we're talking about it in a way that is not concrete. So I want to borrow words from the assembly member to make it concrete. When we look at the closing of jails across the state due to these reforms, because we don't have to have as many people in custody, what racism looks like in practice is we are willing to continue to see a group of people put in a position of deprivation and vulnerability if it promises another group of people economic security and stability. Do we understand that? That is how the racism looks actually in action. We also heard from Assemblymember Clark that there is a political motivation too. So when you see the fear mongering and the messaging, there are very specific interests at work that as a community, we have to see through, because you also gave us some pretty profound data points to show that our community has not become less safe as a result of these reforms. But I want to talk too about some of the points that were made earlier, especially because these are low-level, non-violent offenses, typically committed by people who aren't repetitive criminals, right? So how does that lead into the over-criminalization of actions, where now something that shouldn't be, I guess it goes back to kind of, what was it, the glass window policing, right? Or, stop and frisk, right? That is very much a similar mindset being applied here, is it not? Broken window policing.
Broken windows. So, yes, broken windows policing was actually the subject of a lawsuit in New York City, and the lawsuit was based on racial disparities in who was being arrested, who was being stopped. So racism imbues this, and it imbues our system in all sorts of ways. One of the things, I'm going to just do a little piece on something I'm working on here, which is low-level non-safety traffic stops. And people get criminalized through these low-level non-safety traffic stops, where only studies across the country, studies across the analysis across the state, when there are statistics established that Black and brown people are stopped far more frequently for these low-level stops. And these stops then elevate and get ramped up into confrontations and searches, and then sometimes arrests, and they are focused more in communities of color. So for example, one stop that Julie and I have been talking about for years is No Bell on a Bicycle, where children and adults in communities of color face being stopped for not having a bell on a bicycle. And I'll tell you, I live close to a bike path and I ride my bike a lot. And I have never seen a person in these areas that are where predominantly white people are riding their bikes ever stop for no bell on a bicycle. So these kinds of stops lead to overcriminalization, but also they lead to a real harm in the community in all sorts of other ways. And if you invite me back sometime, I'll talk about that too.
Come on. Okay, one of the areas I see overcriminalization that made me cross-eyed would be offenses being prosecuted, such as criminal possession of a weapon. So sometimes those are the result of no bell on bike stops or those kind of low-level stops where somebody's stopped, for example, in a car for no registration or obscured license plate, and that somebody typically being a black male, and ultimately the police searching the car. Police search the car, they find the gun in the trunk, or they find it in the glove compartment, or they hide it hidden underneath the seat, and everybody in the car gets charged with criminal possession of a weapon. And that statistic gets used to start showing, oh, we've got all these young black males out there with guns. Wrong. The gun was in a car, but because of a provision in the law, in the criminal procedure law, there's something called a presumption, an automobile presumption, that allows the police to arrest everybody in the car for possession of that gun, even though it's hidden. And I'm sure all of us who have been defense attorneys have done any number of trials on these types of cases where we get up and argue to the jury, this gun was hidden from view. Where is the evidence that my client, one, knew it was there, or two, intended to possess it? And the answer is unspoken. The answer is they're a young black male. And those types of prosecutions used to drive me absolutely insane. They still do, to the extent that they're still occurring. Again, I'm not out there taking these cases, but there is an implicit bias there. And that bias is being used to unfairly prosecute people who are almost certainly objectively innocent, not even not guilty, but objectively innocent of criminal possession of a weapon. So that would be an area where, that is just where implicit bias, I think, has been used. The good news is, for what it's worth, juries tend to reject those arguments, and we tend to have a good record on acquittals, because once you look at it in the clear light of day, you're like, this person's in a car, and they found a gun somewhere in the car, where's the evidence, right? But that would be an example of kind of this over-criminalization, and in my opinion, utilizing public fear, or the perception of public fear of young black men, to almost serve as an element of the offense, unfairly and inappropriately. So much like Jill, I would love to see these low-level, criminal stops eradicated, but I would also love, Mr. Green, would love to see there being a little bit of a tempering on prosecutions that involve these sort of constructive possession cases. I'm not arguing about ones where it's in somebody's pocket and the search is legal. I'm not arguing about that, but these ones where the stop is real iffy and you're using the presumption and that concept of constructive possession to prosecute, maybe we could roll that back a little bit.
So I will say that this is something that I've been addressing in the office, both in general and specifically, right? Historically in the office, there have been lots of prosecutions for cases that maybe there shouldn't have been, right? On the one hand, you can say, hey, great job, police officer, you got an illegal gun off the street, hopefully that saved someone's life. But on the other hand, everybody who works in this field takes an oath to uphold the Constitution, both the state and the federal, and the laws of the state of New York. And what I've started to do is address situations where we get cases in where there was a clear violation of someone's constitutional rights, for example, right? That's a case we shouldn't be going forward on. And historically, the office would indict those cases anyway and say, okay, well, we're going to do a hearing and let the judge dismiss it, right? What Ms. Yanka is talking about, we deal with as well. And historically, the office would continue to prosecute all four people in the car, even when someone in the car pled guilty and took ownership of the gun, right? And so that's a change as well, right? So there are ways that we at the DA's office can make changes to make sure that we are protecting people and not needlessly prosecuting people, ruining people's lives, we do have a gun violence problem, and we will continue to address that, and we will continue to address that seriously. But we also will take into account the things that we need to take into account to make sure that we're actually doing justice as opposed to doing harm.
And I just quickly want to say that, I mean, we can talk about the over-criminalization of these small stops, but honestly, the systems that over-criminalize start much younger in lives, particularly lives in the city of Rochester, among our families, and that starts with our child protective system that over-criminalizes poverty. It starts with our school suspension system in our city school district. The pipeline from suspension to jail is strong and exists. City schools continue to be the only ones that have metal detectors on them and make people feel like they're going into a much more jail-like setting than a school-like setting. So some of the systems that do harm do it and even raise the age. I mean, 16 and 17-year-olds going through family court gives them a much better opportunity of having that never be a record that follows them because they go through family court versus criminal court. I have a 20-year-old and I still think he's a child. I have these arguments with people all the time when they, particularly around when we were having the car theft issue with youth. These are kids. These are really kids. But there is an over-adulting of particularly Black boys and Black girls in our community at 16 and 17, even younger, 13. And look at the 9-year-old that was put in handcuffs because her mom was having a mental health break. There is the criminalization of a lot of what we all have now really shown to be driven by racism and other things starts a lot younger than even when they interact with our criminal justice system.
Oh, yes. Can I just real quick before we move on, the other thing that leads a lot to overcriminalization is we had a system here, it's not so prevalent anymore, of field information forms. A cop would roll up on 4 guys standing on the corner. He'd take their names, he'd take their addresses, and he'd just disperse them. But maybe they're wearing a certain color of shirt, or have a certain color of bandana, or they're in a certain neighborhood, or they're affiliated with or standing next to somebody who happens to be a gang member, or somebody thinks they're a gang member. So we have a database now in Monroe County where this background information gets entered. A lot of people don't know about it, but you all of a sudden in this database, you're a gang member. And what does that take? Well, maybe it's just the color of your shirt. Maybe it's somebody that says, I think he's affiliated with a gang. Now, I have a little bit different practice. I represent a lot of guys primarily guys who are charged with violent felony offenses. I can't remember one that wasn't alleged to be a gang member at this point. They're all gang members. I had a hearing where I actually brought in gang members that I had represented who said, we don't know that guy. I don't know what you're talking about. But everybody's a gang member in this system, and now you're looked at as more dangerous than you otherwise would be based upon what? Based on unreliable information, hearsay, double hearsay. There's no filter for what is required before you're designated as a gang member in this database, and now you're going to be basically over-prosecuted, over-criminalized because of this fear of who you are.
I just want to add to that for a second that this system exists and there's information preserved, and it might be a kid whose cousin, he's talking to his cousin, and maybe his cousin is in some kind of situation. But we have a system where when a case is resolved favorably in favor of a defendant, under the statutes, they can have that record sealed. But in this invisible system that exists where people get labeled and maybe labeled for life, there's no process for sealing that because it exists off the books.
A lot of powerful points were just made just now. Before I turn it over to the audience to start asking questions, I want to revisit something that Assemblymember Meeks made, a comment he made in his keynote, where he said we have to start really taking a humanistic approach at how we design systems. And I'll piggyback on some comments that Assemblymember Clark made, because as a regent who represents the 72 school districts within the 8 counties of the 7th Judicial District, Rochester being the largest, one of the things I've really been pushing for with my colleagues in Albany is for us to take a much more comprehensive approach at how we view education and our responsibility, not just to the students, but to their families and the community. A lot of times, the first classrooms our students are ever in is their households and their streets. And it's very important that we start to align the work that we're doing with other governmental agencies to ensure that our work is in alignment so that we produce a different result. Because if I could be candid with you all, and you talked about the suspension to prison pipeline, in many ways, and this is gonna sound terrible, but in many ways, and understand that I'm a graduate of the Rochester City School District, number 8 school, 29 school, Monroe and Marshall, but in many ways, urban education in the state of New York is producing the kinds of people of color that the fearmongers are telling them we are. They're becoming more of a ground to learn what we call a hidden curriculum than the kind of curriculum that allows you to build a life beyond the one you were born into. And that's something that I'm taking extremely serious in how we view our job at making sure education does what it's actually supposed to do, which is to enable you to be successful in life. So with that said, you talked about a humanistic approach at how we build systems. And that's important because right now it feels like we're serving at the mercy of a system, and that how it impacts us is secondary only to ensuring that the system is preserved and continues to function in the manner in which it was originally configured. Talk to me as a state lawmaker at what is the beginning of us taking a humanistic approach at starting to rectify some of these cogs. What would that begin to look like from you guys' end?
So we're in a position to affect policy, right? So looking at some of the policies that families encounter early on, like one policy that we've seen, and we actually had conversations with the leadership of both major hospitals here, University of Rochester as well as Rochester Regional Health, where a practice of mom having a baby and immediately testing mom and the baby and then putting the baby in the child protective system, right? Testing the baby for drugs, period. Even the practice of, when you look at the disparities in comparison to black and brown bodies versus white bodies, testing these families, seeing if the child is if drugs are in the baby system or if mom is on drugs, and immediately putting her into the system, opposed to saying, hey, we see you have some challenges. We want to connect you to these particular resources that exist in the community. Because, just imagine the lifelong trauma, not only on mom, but on that child that's immediately torn apart from mom. So like in our role, being in a position to affect policy, looking at some of these historic, systemic racist policies and how we can counter those policies, and also calling the powers that be in these institutions to task as it relates to working together to improve such practices.
I just want to make sure that we didn't miss that point, that this effort to bring people into this system reaches even into our hospitals. You all just heard that. Okay.
And I would say, one of the things we've been working hard on is our mandated reporting system, which is what ties into CPS. Currently, there was just a report done by Hope 585, and it looked at the 2 ways mandated reporters, which is pretty much everyone is a mandated reporter, and they have to call for neglect or they have to call for abuse. Neglect, 86% of the calls that go in from Monroe County around neglect are not proven. 86%. People are criminalizing poverty, they're criminalizing race, they're over-calling. We are trying to reform the mandated reporting system in different ways to try to stop that, because once a CPS report happens or once an investigation is open, it destroys that family in many ways. And it also creates a distrust in government, so that when families are in need, when they have a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue or just a poverty-related issue, they don't get help. They isolate themselves further, which then often does lead into particularly what we see around crimes that are poverty-related, and not changing. So mandated reporting has to be reformed in our state if we're going to ever get to a point where we can stop at a young age of really putting families and their children immediately into a system that is not helping them in any way. And I will tell you, of those 86% of unfounded reports around neglect, it's not like they're getting help either. It's sort of like, oh, sorry, we disrupted your life. Nothing to see here, goodbye. And so it does double harm because families don't trust anyone to go get help when they really need it. And I think that's really breaking apart a lot of what we want to do, which is create that supportive system with our school district, our community-based partners, our justice system, and everything in between.
Sorry, I have to share that one now. I'm going to take this one down to y'all. So if there are any questions, I'll come up to you, I'll give you the microphone, and I'll ask that you just state your name and then ask your question.
Anyone have a card that they wrote a question on?
All right, I'll go to her first, and then I'll read this off after. Just your name and then your question.
Hi, Sandy Bowler. This is question number one. Can you just redefine what bail reform is? Maybe Julie, could you do that just again? And then if you could just explain if it applies to New York state law, and then what does it have to do with the federal law? Because I remember Mr. Green said we have to follow both New York and federal.
I can answer your last question first. It doesn't have anything to do with federal. Okay, so this is just state law. Bail reform changed the way judges could employ discretion in deciding when to set bail. So as I talked about at the beginning, once upon a time, judges could set bail on any offense that came before them. Anything from a little misdemeanor like a petty larceny to a driving offense like an aggravated unlicensed to a violation level offense, harassments or disorderly conducts. Judges had the discretion to set bail on any of those matters. Bail reform, in my opinion, basically what it did is it recognized that judges could not be trusted with that much discretion, that they were abusing their discretion repeatedly to hold people on these very minor offenses and destroying their lives, basically, and destabilizing their communities. You know, people of color, people who didn't have money to post bail. So bail reform kind of, in my mind, set in and said, you know what, we can't allow this to keep going on. We can't allow people to sit in jail for 8 months on a $10 petty larceny, which happened. You know, we can't have people sit in jail on an aggravated unlicensed operation of a vehicle charge, which happened. You know, driving without a license, people were sitting in jail, and all of the ensuing consequences as a result of that. So bail reform said, you know what, you can't set bail on those things anymore. We're taking that out of your hands. If it's a misdemeanor, if it's a violation level offense, if it's a non-violent felony, you, state judges, are no longer allowed to set bail on those matters. You're still allowed to set bail on violent felony offenses, which to me kind of works in almost a dangerousness standard, and I'm not going to go too deeply into that, but they're still allowed to set bail on what's categorized as violent felony offenses, but they still have to find certain criteria exist before they can do that, and the bail statute sets that out. So in sum and substance, it just said to judges, you don't get to do this anymore, and in my opinion, it was because they were so obviously abusing that power. They couldn't be trusted with it anymore. Does that answer? Okay.
Another question is, what can be done regarding public officials not connected to the judiciary commenting on bail decisions and attacking judges, especially where one official has a brother in the Rochester Police Department?
What are you talking about?
Does any of you want to answer?
To be frank, I don't know that there's much that can be done about it because everybody's got their own First Amendment rights, right? Even public officials. So if someone disagrees with a decision that someone else makes, they're free to voice their opinion about it. There are only a few who are not free to do that on a regular basis, and one of those happens to be judges. They can't comment publicly about any case, even cases in other courts, other states. They're not allowed to. And the other is attorneys in general. Attorneys cannot publicly disparage a judge. So attorneys can't talk about gripes that they have with any judge in particular, or any case in particular. You know, so there is a limit on sort of the inside of the system, but outside of the system, anybody's free to voice their opinion.
But attorneys can say, you know what, that's not the law. You know, that's not a fair comment. That's an inappropriate criticism of a judge. And maybe the attorneys who could best say that, or would be best situated to say that, Mr. Green, would be the attorneys that work with law enforcement who are making such comments, or work with public officials who are making such comments, which are affirmatively misrepresenting what the law is. We know what the law is. I mean, I can make the comment, but nobody cares what I say. But if you have an official, well,
it's not my job to tell County Executive Bell what to say or not say.
no, it's not. It is not. But any attorney could say, you know, that's a misstatement of the law, and some have more weight than others do. That's all.
So I don't know if everyone's familiar with the circumstances that we're all referring to here, but this week, the county executive did comment on a decision that was a decision required by law that a city court judge made. That decision was not an option for that judge. It was required by law, and he was criticized for it. And so what I want to suggest is that not only can attorneys say, hey, that's not, you know, the judge did what he legally was compelled to do, and you shouldn't comment, but all of you can reach out to the elected officials when you hear that something like that and say, my understanding, you know, once you've read about it and get the information, is that this judge had to follow the law. And so I oppose your speaking out against this judge, particularly in these days when judges are really under threat. And so we can all do that. And you know, when you have elected officials, they want to be elected again. And so, you know, if they hear from the public, it might influence their behavior in that context.
I can't ethically respond to that.
I don't know if I need
Oh, so just a follow-up to that question, which came from a retired attorney from a different state who I know very well. But anyway, and to follow up to that, my understanding is there's something called the Little Hayes Act, which is more of a doctrine in New York State that basically says, yes, they do have First Amendment protections, but when you've got two brothers working for two different agencies, and one of them might be carrying water for the other, and this is, you know, both of them have been making an awful lot of misrepresentations about bail reform. There's nothing that can be done to stop that?
I'm not going to comment on County Executive Bello is free to say whatever he wants to say. He's got a First Amendment right. What's important is that people, when they hear information like that, follow up on it. My office was involved in that case. I mean, I'll be frank, it is Judge Van White was being roundly criticized for releasing an individual by taking them off of an ankle monitor. The judge, I need to be really clear on this, had absolutely zero options. He had to release that person, and the reason why is because for whatever reason, the district attorney's office chose not to do one of the two things that they could have done to maintain that person's custody status. So again, this is all criminal procedure law. I'm not making up any of this. If the prosecution felt it was appropriate or necessary, or under the circumstances of the case, to keep that individual on an ankle monitor, they could have indicted the case or run a preliminary hearing. Because they did not do that, the individual was entitled to be released. So one of my attorneys appeared on two different TV stations to clarify this really simple point. And I think she did a great job saying this is 18080 and the criminal procedure law requires release. It's not even a bail reform issue. This statute has been around as long as I've been around, and that's a long time. It was probably around long before I was around. It requires release. The only thing that had anything to do with bail reform was that the ankle monitor is considered custody. And I think that was a bail reform change. So since this individual was out on an ankle monitor, he was still considered in custody, which means the ball then went to the prosecuting attorney. If you want to keep him in, here's your two options: indict or run a preliminary hearing. They chose not to. I'm going to question that. Okay, that was their decision. The client gets out. Judge White has to release the individual. So I saw the chief of police comment after my attorney spoke on the segment and said, yeah, but the judge should have shown more concern for the victim. That's not the law. That's not the law. That actually would be suggesting that Judge White should have broken the law. So that was puzzling to me, you know, that I assume he has attorneys. I assume he could contact Mr. Green and say, you know, what actually happened here? Who should I be mad at? Did the system break down in some way that, you know, the public should know about? It didn't. It's something that happens in court every day, dozens of times. This became news. I'm not entirely sure why, but yeah, it is then the obligation, I believe, of those of us, I said in my office, who understand to, you know, go out there and try and explain it to people, and hopefully, you know, you'll listen. But it is, you know, it was puzzling to see an attorney say this is the law, and then the chief of police say it's not, you know, and who do you believe, you know? So that's a little concerning.
So I can only comment in a limited basis on this, but I think it's incredibly unfair to only tell half the story. The incident in question was the second court appearance in the case. The first court appearance in the case, an arraignment on a case involving domestic violence where an individual actually fired rounds into a home that was occupied by other people, an individual who had a history, and our office did request cash bail, which was denied by Judge White. That then leads to the second court date, where all there is an electronic monitor, right? And I'm not going to get into the specifics of the case any further because I wasn't in court, so I don't know exactly what we put on the record, and I can't tell you anything that wasn't put on the record. But what I can tell you is that domestic violence victims often do not cooperate when the individuals who do terrible things to them or are alleged to have done terrible things to them are at liberty to do other things. And if we do not have cooperative victims and witnesses, we can't go forward either in grand jury or at preliminary hearings.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Diane Morse, and I have a question back to the gun charges issue, which I'm not entirely understanding. So I just want to say that I participated in this program, the Judicial Observation Project, where I got to sit in the court, which was all of gun charges, and every single person was brought out who was charged with a gun offense was a man of color, almost all black men, all in orange jumpsuits. So they were all, and it sounds like that means if it's a gun charge, they're not eligible for bail, or maybe they didn't give it. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is how and I didn't really totally follow your answer, DA Green, that, like, is there anything being done to prevent the police stopping and doing an entire search of an entire car and arresting every person? Because my understanding is part of the whole purpose of bail reform was to keep people's whole lives from being disrupted. So even if the case is dismissed eventually, they're spending whatever number of nights in jail, losing their jobs, losing their housing, et cetera, et cetera. So is there anything being done to prevent these searches taking place where every single person in the car gets arrested?
Well, that depends on the reason for the search, right? I mean, sometimes searches are legitimate and sometimes they're not. It's constitutional principles that determine whether or not the police are able to search someone's vehicle, someone's house, a person themselves, their belongings. And so the police have to follow the constitutional principles and they have to follow the general orders of the police department. And my office has no control over whether or not police officers search an individual or their property. The cases come to us after the fact, right? So the police are out there, they have an encounter, they might arrest everybody in a car based on the automobile presumption. We get that after the fact and can only deal with the case after the fact. Yeah.
With the police to try to get them to stop arresting women who in self-defense maybe would get arrested. So I'm just wondering, is there anybody in your office who's having conversations like that with the police to try to keep them from these arrests? Or is that possible? Can your office have conversations like that with the police to try to prevent the arrests?
We can have conversations, and we actually often teach both at the police academy and at in-service training. But we're teaching from a perspective where we've gone through law school and we've been practicing for 3, 5, 10, 20, 30 years. We try to explain the principles as best we can. And like I said earlier, I think to the point about the federal law, what I said was that we've all taken an oath just to uphold both the state and the federal constitution and the laws of the state of New York. That was the only reference to the federal law. But when we teach, we do try to teach the correct constitutional principles. Once anybody leaves that room, we can't control what happens.
In terms of stopping the vehicles and then searching, so the searches happen after the stops, and one of the things that where I'm making an effort is there is legislation that is now pending before the state assembly and senate where it would limit the police from stopping individuals solely on the basis of these low-level non-safety stops, and there's a list of them. And then it would also require that if there's a search, that be recorded, and that if it's deemed a consent search, that the person gave consent, that there be certain protections to ensure that, so that could be challenged in court afterwards. I would add also that there are some police departments and some district attorneys' offices across the country that don't use the evidence obtained as a result of these low-level stops in prosecutions.
My question is, I feel like I'm leaving here with such deeper understanding about bail reform, so I just want to thank all of you for what you've shared with us today. So my question is that the scale that I've heard today of fear and dangerousness and anxiety that is attributed to Blackness is pervasive, and it's harmful in the criminal justice system, but in multiple systems. The religious system, the education system, the social health and human services system, and the financial system, and many more. And so my question is, given what we know about the scale and the pervasiveness, are you able, where you work, where you lead, to mandate anti-racism and anti-bias work to make attempts to undo this mammoth? It's very clear that many of you on this panel is very aware you have been trained in some way to shift the lens. What can you do in the places where you are working, where you are leading, to bring others into this?
I'll start. We had the privilege several years ago of having Danielle Ponder work in our office, and this was she gets a hand. And this was during 2020, when racial issues were really coming to the fore and violence against Black men was becoming, you can't ignore it anymore. It's in your face, it's on video, you're watching it. So once Danielle started in our office, there were other lawyers in our office who were very vocal about implicit bias and explicit bias. And maybe it really took the events of 2020 to really slap us in the face to have to confront these things. So we had a leader in our office who was able to start doing some training, some evaluation, start testing people's feelings or, the way we talk to one another, the words that we use, the way they might be offensive. And that was kind of a start. For me, now I'm responsible for every single person who works in my office. My name is on the door, so I'm responsible for them. And I can't interact with every single one of them, but whenever I have the opportunity, and I'm never happy to say this, I know where my biases were. I know where I saw things the wrong way, and I was allowing a person's color or a person's background to kind of impact what I did. I remember Danielle saying, how do you decide who to call back first? Something as simple as that, and are you choosing your white clients first because they're easier for you to talk to? Yeah, I think I am. It's just little things like that. So I keep my door open, and whenever the attorneys, if they come out and they come and talk to me and they want information, I try to be sensitive to where they aren't seeing where their biases are affecting their assessment of a case. And I use the criminal possession of a weapon case just as really one that is consistent, where people really have to stop and think, wait a minute, why? Why would I think that person wants a gun? Even if it's right in front of them. Why would I think if a gun was right in front between me and Assemblyman Meeks, whose gun is it, right? Oh, it must be his. Not so, right? So challenging the attorneys to start thinking differently about it and how we talk to one another, how we support one another. I wish I could say that I could wave a magic wand, make it happen, but it's on a case-by-case basis. All the attorneys have supervisors. Everybody has a supervisor. The supervisors are also trained in this, and we have meetings at least once a month, and we're supposed to just kind of be able to sniff it out, hunt it out, and try and eradicate it and educate as best we can. We don't have Danielle anymore, and it's very hard to replace her. So that's the best that we can do right now.
I'm at Empire Justice Center, which is a civil legal services organization, and we do have trainings for staff. But beyond that, the focus of our work in several areas is anti-racism or dealing with racial inequity. So, for example, the work that I'm doing is on police reform, and right now my project started with a report which dealt with the racial disparities in low-level non-safety stops, with pretext stops. We have a school discrimination helpline. So when parents across the state are having issues with discrimination against their children in school, we can guide, we can get involved in those cases. I'm sure we have others that I'm not thinking of right now, but those are the two that just came to my mind immediately.
It's easy for me. I'm the managing partner in my office, so I can dictate whatever I want. But I don't have to, because the people that I work with are completely into this. But let me just give you a resource if you're interested in it. Hugh Russ, who is one of the firm leaders of Hodgson Russ, one of the largest firms in Buffalo and a leader of the Erie County Bar Association, wrote a great essay, which the title of it was, "I'm Prejudiced." And he's an older white man, and he did a really good job of challenging people to recognize that that's the water that we swim in. And he challenged himself to recognize it. And you can find it, ask Mr. Google, I'm sure he'll be able to find it for you. But I thought it was a really good essay about recognizing the problem, and recognition is the first step toward solving the problem, right? Taking steps to solve the problem. If you don't recognize it, you can't solve it.
So as a state delegation, one of the first things we did coming into office, there's 5 of us that's fairly new. We've been here, almost 6 years. And coming in with the dean of the delegation, Harry Brunson, but we reached out to our local community resources. We had a powwow as a Democratic delegation, and we said, we want to be intentional in doing this work from a racial justice lens. So we thought about, okay, well, who can we reach out in Rochester that can make us better in that space? And lo and behold, yours truly, Pastor Myra Brown, hosted our delegation in that space. We've done I think we did 2 workshops with you, and the work is never done, but I can appreciate the fact that I have colleagues that get it, that say, hey, we want to be better in this space. And we don't all look alike, right? And there's a commitment from our delegation to work at seeing things through a racial justice lens as we move forward and affect policy at the state level. So I would just say the key thing is being intentional and recognizing the challenges and doing things that can improve your ability in that space as well. Thank you.
I got just one more. Oh. Look, we on a time crunch here.
I can be brief.
Yeah.
One of my biggest priorities in the office since I came back is training and education. We've never had a training program in the office for new assistant district attorneys, and we now have one. And we already have, in April, as part of our continuing legal education, we have an implicit bias training coming up. Reverend Brown and I have talked about doing another training down the road. So all of this is just part of my main priority, which is training and education in the office.
And I would just echo what my colleague said. Not only did we have that great commitment here among our delegation, but we all bring it back into the Capitol and Albany to our respective spaces and places that we spend time to ensure that we're hopefully enlightening those who may not be as enlightened to some of it. But also for me, my real focus is just the harm of systems and ensuring that we continue to show and push and make people really understand how our systems harm families, not help.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask, I'm going to make it open, but just one person to answer this one is, what harm can be tied to social media, especially for minority youth? Who wants to take that one on?
No, I'm sorry. I'll shout that out. I hate social media. I'm not on it. You won't find me on it. If there's, I don't mean to be sacrilegious, but if there's a devil, that's the devil, in my opinion. People posture, right, on social media. People are looking for attention on social media. They'll do anything for it. And I think that has led to, especially young people who their brains aren't working really well, they're not firing, to make horrible decisions, whether that be young girls getting associated with predators, online and being exploited, putting pictures, doing things like that, right up to people fighting. My understanding is sometimes if there's going to be a fight, the tweet goes out and everybody goes to watch it. It's entertainment, it's the Coliseum, and it is deeply, deeply disturbing to me to know that things are occurring for the gram, do it for social media, try and become Insta-famous, get a reputation for being tough. It's going to be videoed beating somebody up. It's a provocation, and I think specifically young people can't resist it because they're just not up to resisting things yet, and the consequences are horrific, right? Bad things happen, and it's on video, and it's on social media, and we're now in a position to try and defend that case, but there's 5 videos of what happened, and it's a lot harder to convince, a prosecutor for lenience when they've got that kind of evidence. So social media, I believe in a lot of different ways, can really, really destroy lives. That's my opinion. Maybe somebody here has a more positive approach, but
no, but with social media, there's some major challenges, and I think we have to be mindful. I mean, we talk about day-to-day bullying, but there's a such thing as cyberbullying, right? Which is a major challenge, and it has all types of grim effects on our youth. And I think we have to be intentional in looking at the challenges that lie ahead with social media platforms, and look at ways that we can also incorporate systems in our education system to start educating our children on what the expectation. This is how you govern yourself in these spaces, because the new thing, well, it's not all that new, but it's the cyber world, right? Where you have kids who create these avatars of sorts that they have emotional attachments to. And I've been part of discussions as to how do the system potentially criminalize some of the actions that are taking place on these platforms. So imagine you have some cyberbullying taking place, or a young man or young woman who has an avatar. There's been instances where individuals have gang raped avatars, right? And these systems. So the connection is what type of emotional toll are those actions taken on the individual whose avatar it is? And it could potentially become a law to look at ways to charge individuals with a crime for their actions in the cyberspace. So I think that we have to really move ahead and recognize those challenges and implement education in these spaces so our children know how to better conduct themselves in these spaces.
And the only thing I would add to it is, and we've heard this from the mayor, that some of the gun violence, particularly in our youth, in our communities, are over some of the what we as adults would think of as the most silly things, stepping on shoes, looking at my girlfriend. But part of it is because all of it is on video now, and it's posted in public places, is that what used to be something that hurt my feelings that 4 people saw and maybe told in stories to others is different when thousands of people see it. And so our teenagers who don't have the brain capacity to sort through that and react different are really dealing with some challenges that we didn't have to face because 4 people saw it versus 1,000, and it didn't live in public spaces forever. So it's real, but it's creating this issue where real violence is happening over some of the smallest affronts to each other. So we do have to really figure out a way to combat that.
Well, and I think one of the real dangers is the unrealistic expectations that are created by social media, and kids, maybe disadvantaged kids, will see this and say, well, I should have this, or I should have that, or I'm this is what I'm entitled to. And many of these lower level offenses are maybe driven by the idea that I'm not getting my slice of the pie here because I'm looking on social media and all these people have this wonderful stuff and I don't have it. So, now I want to go out and get it.
First off, give our panel a round of applause. Now y'all can let it all out. I feel like I know so much more about the criminal justice system, about public safety, about each of you as respective stakeholders from your part of the system. And I'm glad to know that you're trying to make the corrective measures to see that these systems operate in a better way. So I appreciate that. I do want you to know, though, Assemblymember Meeks, and I just sent it to you and Assemblymember Clark, we actually did partner with the governor's office and put together a media literacy toolkit for schools, because it was social media, but it was also when the alternative facts and the plethora of information out there now, and how do we equip kids to know how to navigate and find out what's true and what's false. So that's something that, look at it and let us know your feedback, because it can always be upgraded or amended. Without further ado, though, I want to call Reverend Myra up so she can give us a closing prayer.
I am actually going to defer to Reverend Fred Dix, who is one of the pastors who is working with me here at Spiritus Christi. But before I do that, I want to just offer some thank yous. I want to just thank SPARC. Can all my SPARC members stand up? Like, this day would not have happened without them. I have the most amazing volunteers and colleagues working together on these issues of racism and working. So thank you so much. Help me also welcome Adrian. I thank Adrian Hale. He is such an amazing leader in this community, and I couldn't imagine doing these annual events without him. So Adrian, thank you so much. And again, thank you again to this amazing panel. We are so fortunate in Rochester to have such incredible leaders who are committed to the work, and who we can call on at any given point. We can challenge, we can ask questions, we can give feedback, we can get feedback. And so help me again thank this amazing panel of folks who've been with us today. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to ask Reverend Dix to offer our closing prayer.
Can we stand? Again, thank you to our panel, and thanks to all of you who thought it not robbery to be here today, to learn and to grow, because when truth becomes optional, that's when our society fails, and that's when our society falls. Will you pray with me? Dear God, we thank you for this time of discussion, this time of learning, this time of understanding. God, for you say there is a season for all things. God, so we thank you for this season of justice that we are coming upon. God, we ask now that you continue to uphold our leaders who stand for justice and righteousness, who stand for truth and facts that make this world a better place. God, we thank you for every member here who came to understand better, that we might be a voice to speak against systems of injustice, the underlying systems of racism. God, we are here today because even in your word you say to study to show thyself approved. So we studied today, God. We asked questions. We had a master class. So God, now send us out, that the work will not stop here at this discussion, that the work will not stop here at this panel, and that we'll continue to move the needle forward. For we know that a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. God, so we thank you for this opportunity. Bless us now as we leave this place, but never from your presence. And the people of God say, amen. Why don't you high five somebody?
So with that, there's going to be a nice reception in the Hadlock Lounge. Thank you all so much for coming out, and we'll see you again next year.
Oh, I think I have a...
Oh. That's mine.
Hello.
Hold up.
We're waiting on sound. Waiting on
And we
sound.
just have one more closing song.
Check 1, 2. Okay, so
Take
I
it
wrote
away,
this song
Neppy.
for the Love and Justice concert, so I'll just sing it for you real quick. The sun is shining on my face. Seems like a perfect day to just be me. But it's harder than it looks. My face is like an open book, knowing we're all not free. But it's time the tables turn. Come on, when will we learn? It's not something we have to earn, but it's something we all deserve. Love and justice, you and me, he and she, they and we, everyone on this earth, we all deserve. Love and justice, you and me, he and she, they and we, everyone on this earth, we all deserve love and justice.